The Truman Doctrine will begin an earnest American effort to rebuild Western Europe. The pursuit of stabilization would lead to what Truman would call the second half of the same nut. This came in George Marshall's plan to inject a ton of cash to aid Europe's rebuilding effort, and this was going to be available for all of Europe, not just unoccupied Western Europe. The greatest concern was twofold. First, the war had neutered European industry. If they have no means of production, they have no jobs. And if they have no jobs, they have no purchasing power. This led to an $8 billion trade gap in 1947 that was unsustainable. Europe needed an economic shot in the arm to get back on its feet. The argument would be stated by Will Clayton, Assistant Secretary of State, that, quote, "No nation in modern times can long expect to enjoy a rising standard of living without increased foreign trade," end quote. As Europe's exports to the U.S. were only a half of what the Americans sent to Europe, the worry was that unemployment would eventually spread into the United States without the European market to send finished products into. Rather than framing this as something of a mortgage to rebuild, Marshall suggested that this plan was, quote, directed against hunger, poverty, desperation, and chaos, end quote. Germany after World War I seemed to demonstrate that pro-Western democratic stability depended upon congenial rebuilding. Thus, Britain, France, West Germany, and Italy, and others would receive an influx of cash after $5.3 billion was approved by Congress. While Marshall attempted to assure the Soviets that this policy in the Marshall Plan was not directed against any country or doctrine, they had a hard time believing it. When European diplomats were made aware of the policy, the Soviet delegates stormed out, accusing the United States of attempting to dominate Europe with dollars. Stalin privately expressed concern that such a policy would render his efforts in his occupied territory fruitless. Stalin would act to guarantee a maintenance of his wartime plunder. Rather than accepting any Marshall Plan monies, he would forbid any of Soviet-occupied territories from accepting any of it. He furthermore crafted the Molotov Plan, which was supposed to be a bilateral trade agreement set to benefit Eastern and Central Europe. This, coupled with a new intelligence agency, completely forbade any work with the West. It placed the two sides completely at odds with one another and set the stage for further tension.